John Harbaugh, Todd Monken, and the Baltimore Ravens coaching staff must answer for what happened in the AFC Championship game on offense. We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can subscribe and follow along as well. 5 days a week of Ravens coverage, even in the offseason, which we are unfortunately in now for the Ravens as they lose in the AFC Championship game 17-10 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Tell a friend, tell a family member. We're here for them Monday through Friday, bringing you the best daily Ravens coverage here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Tough way for the Ravens season to end on Sunday. Just absolutely brutal. This team felt like it had it all, felt like they were the team, and their magical season all of a sudden isn't so magical anymore. We're going to be talking about, again, just breaking down everything that happened, continuing to try to analyze what went wrong in that game. And as you kind of talk about for Baltimore, what it means for the future, there's a lot we can get there too. So in the first part of the show, we're going to talk about the coaching staff. I mean, at this point, they absolutely have to answer for what happened on offense. We could have said the same thing about Mike Macdonald, but guess what? Mike Macdonald adjusted. And Mike Macdonald was the one coach that I think did a good job of really figuring out the Chiefs and taking the first half struggles and turning them into a brilliant second half. But when you talk about the offensive side of the ball, it was just absolute pure disaster. Running game is the thing you point to. And we'll talk about Lamar in the second part of the show. Obviously, he was not good enough. Also, this doesn't all fall on one person or one area of the game. There's a lot that contributes to it. But I have to start with this because I continued to kind of dive in and look at, well, all right, they had 16 rushing attempts as a team, only 6 by running backs. Those are not good stats to begin with whatsoever. But just how bad was it? Just how unconventional was it for the Ravens? After doing some diving, the 16 rushing attempts by the Ravens was the lowest total they've had in 6 years. 6 years. They have had 16 twice in the Lamar Jackson era before this game. In 6 years, their lowest was 15. That was back in 2017. So in every other game, but essentially 3, you want to take the 2 in the Lamar Jackson era plus this game, every single game since week 4 of 2017, the Ravens have had more than 16 rushing attempts outside of those 3 games. And you see the Ravens with like 54 rushing attempts and 41 rushing attempts. You barely see them have this. It has been their bread and butter for years now. And the Ravens went away from it when it was actually working. And I can't really, well, I guess working is the wrong term because they never really got it going. But we saw after Lamar Jackson took that 4th down play and ran for, what was it, 20, 30 yards or something of that nature. You see Gus Edwards get a 15-yard carry the play after, and the Ravens were like, we're not going to do that again. We're not going to do it again. That can't happen. The Ravens averaged 32 rushing attempts this season per game. 32 of them. They cut that in half in this championship game. And there are reasons why, but the reasons aren't acceptable to me. And part of it is because I think they hit the panic button way too early. I think they did. And it's the same trend we saw from back in 2019 when Gus Edwards also had 3 carries in that game. And John Harbaugh was like, yeah, we kind of got away from our game and the game went this way. And John Harbaugh said in this post-game presser, the game went this way, went a certain way. And it was that. That's something that just it's not good enough. I mean, in this situation, you're playing Patrick Mahomes, you're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending champions, and credit to them. They, for the most part, played pretty mistake-free football. They made opportunities work for them. But the Ravens also just beat themselves in so many different ways. And this, to me, is at the top of the list because the Ravens took themselves out for a defense, for any defense. One of your main goals is to make the opposing offense one-dimensional in some way. Take away the running game, take away the passing game, take away play action, take away something. Make them less multidimensional than they are. The Ravens made themselves one-dimensional. They did it to themselves against the Chiefs front that was already banged up. Derek Nottie missed this game. Chris Jones was banged up. Willie Gay didn't play in this game also. And the Chiefs were just coming off a game where they gave up 182 yards to the Bills on the ground on 39 attempts, and they ranked in the mid-20s in rushing yards per attempt on the season. I get the Ravens got down. I get it's a big spot, but that's not an excuse for you to abandon a game plan. And it was off from the jump. It felt like the Ravens were trying to force stuff down the field early, and it worked somewhat, but it didn't really work a ton. And you could have worked play action off of it. And when we're talking about, well, who's at fault for it? Is it Todd Monken? Is it John Harbaugh? I mean, look, Monken calls the plays, and he certainly deserves blame. But John Harbaugh, he's the head man. He signs off on this stuff, apparently, at least, right? I'm not in that locker room. I'm not in that building. But John Harbaugh's the head guy, and we have seen this trend recently in John Harbaugh's playoff tenure. You can go back to 2019 when they, again, got away from what should have been their game plan, what should have been their game script, and it did them in. And especially the thing that I remember, I mean, there are so many things, but one of the things is later in the game when essentially you had to start to move away from it because they just weren't doing it and the Ravens were down. It wasn't like this team was down by 4 scores or even 3 scores, right? It was a 10-point game and Baltimore was playing like they were down by 30. They were spamming deep shots down the field late in this game, and none of them were hitting, which we'll talk about with Lamar in the second part of the show. And you can say, oh, well, the refs didn't make this call and they didn't make that call. Well, I'm not going to put it on the refs, right? The Ravens did enough to themselves, and you shouldn't even in a game like that, you shouldn't put the refs in a situation to decide the outcome of a game. And the Ravens, I think, decided the outcome of the game themselves. They didn't play well enough. They were not up to the task. The coaching staff on offense did not have their guys ready, and that was consistent throughout the game. And it's why I give Mike McDonald so much credit, because his guys weren't ready to start the game. But guess what? By the start of that second half, they were good to go, and they did not allow a single Chiefs point in that second half. And if you had told me that in the AFC Championship game, the Ravens would hold Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs to 17 points, with the way that the Ravens offense had been playing and had found their stride, you told me Kansas City scored 17 points, I would have been like, hallelujah, the Ravens won the game, because there's no way the Ravens are putting up less than 17 points in the game. But that's on the assumption that they play to their strength, they play to where they're built, and not that Baltimore can't throw the ball, but that's all they tried to do. 6 attempts for your running backs is just not acceptable in a game like this when you have a guy like Gus Edwards, who, again, had that 15-yard explosive run. Justice Hill had 3 for 3. I get it, but he was making other plays, and you just didn't give either of them a chance to get going. And not only is the 16 rushing attempts low, it was actually less on designed rushing attempts. You know, Lamar had 8 carries, but some of those were him scrambling around and making something out of nothing. I believe it was they had 11 or 12 design runs, not 16. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was around there. So it's actually even less when you think about the Ravens actually saying we're going to run the football here decisively. And they have to answer for it. I mean, they can say that the game got away from them, but I really do think they hit the panic button way too early. They got way too out of their game flow and game plan early. And in a spot like that, it's, again, coming up short in the biggest moments. It doesn't matter the regular season went the way it did for the Ravens. You play the regular season to get ready for the playoffs, and if you're not ready in the playoffs, in my opinion, especially for a team like this that got so dominant, was so hot, it's a failure. And we'll talk about it throughout the week, but it wasn't good enough. It was a terrible offensive game plan, and the coaching staff, whether it's John Harbaugh or Todd Monken, whatever side you're on there, they have to answer for it. And it has been a trend. So on the John Harbaugh side of things, we saw it with Greg Roman. We saw it with Todd Monken. Who is the common denominator and all that? It is John Harbaugh. So that conversation is definitely going to be spicy throughout the offseason, and especially here on Locked On Ravens. And coming up, we'll talk about Lamar Jackson, because while the coaching staff does have to answer, we can also admit Lamar Jackson was not good enough in that game against Kansas City. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by FanDuel, and happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I wish the Ravens were in it, but unfortunately, that's not how it's going this season. And for me, just getting together with friends, family, watching the game, of course, the food, the commercials are always there. There are always a couple good commercials in there as well. And again, I wish it was Baltimore. It kind of pains me to talk about the Super Bowl right now, but there are a couple bets I do like in this game. I think Christian McCaffrey anytime touchdown, that's a pretty good bet to cash in. And if the 49ers run the ball, I'd expect McCaffrey to score. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W, or maybe 2 or 3. Not only can you bet who wins Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. So new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back, our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Really appreciate the support, especially that I got throughout the season here. I was reflecting yesterday just on the Ravens season and how magical it was. And, I kept coming back to how much support I've gotten on this show and how the growth has been. And, of course, we're continuing. It's 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, also in the offseason, plus bonus content. But, of course, there'll be no post-game shows until about August when that preseason starts up again. But whether you're with me in video form, audio form, both communities mean so much to me. And the fact that we've been able to grow this show the way that we have, I'm not planning on stopping this thing anytime soon. And I just want to thank everybody from the bottom of my heart. And if you're new to the show, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're on YouTube in audio form, same thing, same deal. There's no like button there, but you can share it with a friend or a family member, and you can also follow along wherever you get your podcast. But let's continue talking Ravens here. I know it's tough right now, and I double appreciate the support for anybody who's tuning in and listening to this, because I know how hard it is after a loss, and especially a loss like this and in a moment like that. But we talked about it, the coaches have to answer in the first part of the show. But as I said, I'm not someone to blame everything on one person or on one area. We can admit the coaching staff has to take some blame, but we also have to admit Lamar Jackson needs some too. And on this show, I really practice praising when people need to be praised and criticizing when people need to be criticized. And look, Lamar Jackson made some spectacular plays on Sunday, but he was not good enough. Didn't seem like he was ready after being so locked in. Felt like the Chiefs' defensive scheme really got to him. And Darren Orlovsky did a great video on how the Chiefs were taking away throwing lanes from Lamar. And I think it got to him. Now, did the game flow help? No. Did the game script help? No. And I'm not here to rag on Lamar and say, oh, he's never going to be good enough. Keyshawn Johnson made a great point where we've seen great players, electric players, some of the best of all time, lose in big moments for a long time. And then all of a sudden, they just go out there and deliver. Lamar hasn't delivered yet. And you look at his 2-4 playoff record, and you look at how he played in this game in particular. I thought he made some rush throws, some rush decisions. The deep ball was not working for him again. Now, the deep ball, some of it was working. That Zay Flowers, he had a couple of connections with Zay. But I also thought some of his reads, again, were not great. I think he missed a few big gains, maybe even touchdowns. And the offensive line on some plays did not do him favors. If the offensive line gives him maybe half a second more here or a second there, maybe it's a different outcome. But we have to be honest about his performance on Sunday. From where Lamar was, from how he was playing the entire year and what the expectations were, his performance was a letdown. It was a disappointment. And that it's tough to say because I wish he played better, but he didn't. And that to me is why we have to have this conversation, one of the reasons why the Ravens lost this game. And you look at the pure box score stats, I know that doesn't tell the whole story, but 20 of 37 for Lamar, 272, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. So with that, I mean, look, 20 of 37 for 272, for Lamar it's fine, but that's just about a 50% completion percentage, a little over. And then you have the interception. But his decision, for example, to throw into triple coverage on that Isaiah Likely interception, we know there was pass interference on that play, right? But the decision, just the first decision for him to kind of let Isaiah Likely work up there and then throw it into triple coverage, that wasn't a good decision by him, right? The fumble, the strip sack, I'm not putting on Lamar. Ronnie Stanley got beat by Charles Omenihu, and Lamar was getting ready to throw that ball. I think it was to Rashad Bateman deep, but that was on Omenihu. That wasn't on Jackson. But from where the Ravens needed Lamar to be, just scoring one touchdown in this game and it happening early was not great. He had a 42.9 QBR, 75.5 quarterback rating, and he was also working backwards again. When the Chiefs started to pressure Lamar, he started to go north and south. And, he can step up in the pocket and make some of those decisions. But when he starts backpedaling, that helps the defense, because if you're an edge rusher, you can just run by the tackle and then collapse in if Lamar's running back and back and back and back. And I get him wanting to make a play, wanting to extend the play, but there was a play where he got sacked on, I can't remember if it was third down or not. I think it was third down because it brought up a fourth down that the Ravens got. But he held the ball, and it's things that we've talked about for Lamar that have creeped up and popped up for him over the course of his career. But I think for a lot of people, they just thought that we were over that stuff. We thought Lamar, we got over that. But I think it just started to come back because the Ravens got panicked. They changed the game flow. I don't know. I highly doubt that the Ravens went into this game and said, we're going to give our running back 6 carries and we're not going to run the ball essentially ever. It was panic. The Chiefs go down, they score. The Ravens respond and they score. The Chiefs score again. It's 14-7. That's why I think the Ravens, and that includes Lamar, the coaching staff, everybody, they played this game. They coached this game like they were down by 30 points. And at no point was it that far of a score where the Ravens were separated by that much. Look, I get the Kansas City. If you look at a 17-10 score, Kansas City dominated that score. If you're looking at how the game actually went, it was more like 27-10. Kansas City was clearly the better team on the field on Sunday. But the defense, for the most part, did their job. I mean, in the second half, they absolutely did their job. It was a rough start, right? That was a definite rough start. And then the Ravens had some very costly penalties, both offensively and defensively. But if you're Lamar Jackson here, you're in this moment. It's your first time in the AFC Championship game. There is pressure that goes along with that, right? I'm not here to say that Lamar is never going to perform in the playoffs. We've seen him win. Again, it's the narrative of Lamar can never win in the playoffs. He's won 2 playoff games. Is that impressive in the grand scheme of things, considering he's also lost 4, and this is now going to be his 7th season in the league coming up, which is crazy to think about, by the way. Look, it doesn't excuse that. I'm not excusing Lamar's performance because he needed to be better in this game. He was not good enough in this game, but sometimes it goes that way. But for the Ravens, with Lamar's prime, for him, for the coaching staff, you can't waste these years, especially a year like this when they were so good. You surround them with the weapons, and then nobody can contribute outside of Zay Flowers and essentially Lamar on a couple of plays, but still wasn't great for him. So definitely a disappointing end to Lamar Jackson's season. He will win the MVP, and that is deserved based off of the regular season. But when it mattered in the AFC Championship here, Lamar did not show up the way the Ravens needed him to. I'm not saying he's never going to do it, because I have confidence in Lamar, and I am a big Lamar guy. Let me put it out there now before people say, oh, you're not a Lamar guy. I'm a big Lamar Jackson guy, and I have been really ever since college at Louisville. But we have to be honest with the performance here, and it was not good enough, unfortunately. Coming up, though, we'll talk a bit about the future of the Ravens. They have plenty of free agents coming up. They could create some cap room as well to better their team. And, of course, they have to look ahead as their season is done. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. In passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Also, items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Thanks so much for tuning in to Locked On Ravens today, making us your first listen each and every day. If you're an everydayer, really appreciate you locking in with me on Locked On Ravens every day and consuming this Ravens content over here. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. We really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button, hitting the like video. And if you find your way coming back every once in a while, if you've heard me before, you're checking back in today, again, we really appreciate you subscribing, hitting that like button as well. It helps put the show out in front of more Ravens fans than NFL fans. And actually, most of our viewer base here on Locked On Ravens is not subscribed. So I'd really appreciate the subscription. If you find yourself checking in, you might as well hit that subscribe button, right? It helps me out, and I really appreciate it. The Ravens have a future to think about, though. You know, it's tough to think about now, talking about I didn't want to do like mock draft Mondays and kind of look ahead to the draft and free agency and all that until the Ravens were Super Bowl champions, but they didn't show up and they lost. So now we have to think about it. And the future for the Ravens is going to really be defined, I think, a lot by this offseason. Now, if you're listening to me here, this is what I want the Ravens to do. First move they make that is not related to this year's free agency. Sign Brandon Stephens to an extension. Sign Brandon Stephens to an extension today. Do it today. Do it tomorrow. Do it soon. Just get it done before the season starts. Brandon Stephens, you can avoid the problem you have with Justin Madubuike right now, with Patrick Queen. Well, that was an option decline, but same concept. Geno Stone. The Ravens like to sign these guys coming off rookie contracts to extensions. Fair to the player, fair to the team. They try to adjust Madubuike. Madubuike bet on himself, and look, it worked. There are rumors Patrick Queen did the same thing. There was an extension on the table. Queen bet on himself, and it worked. Maybe if you approach Stephens with an extension, he does the same thing, and he says, look, I'm going to bet on myself. I see how it worked for my teammates, and if that's what he wants to do, that's what he wants to do, right? You can't really control that. They did it with Broderick Washington. They signed him to that team-friendly extension, and it was fair to Broderick, too. I think it was a fair deal for both sides. But if you're talking about the future, Brandon Stephens just ascended this season. And if I'm the Ravens, I want to have him long-term, but I don't want to wait until his value is $100 million. And look, if Stephens has a year like that and he gets signed to a big money contract, and look, I don't think it'd actually be $100 million. So it's more of like just very valuable. But if Stephens right now, if you can sign Brandon Stephens to a 3-year, $35 million extension for Brandon Stephens, you do that, because I think if he has another great year, you're maybe looking at 4 years, $75 million territory for him. You want to get ahead of that if you're the Ravens, like they have done so many times before. So that was a little rant there. But talking about this offseason, Justin Madubuike, Patrick Queen, those are the two big names to watch. For the franchise tag, I mean, both are in play for those guys. The franchise tag is around $20.9 million for defensive lineman this offseason, and the linebacker is about 22.8. That franchise tag number is. Now, Madubuike is going to clear that 20.9 number by a lot. I think he makes at least 25 annually on a contract. So will he even play on a franchise tag? That's a conversation. Patrick Queen, I think annually would maybe make a little bit, less than 22.8, but I still think that he's going to get a huge big money contract. And I think at this point, it's one, not both for the Ravens. And more realistically, I think you look at Madubuike as the guy that the Ravens probably want to retain in terms of they already have Roquan Smith as a $100 million linebacker. I think Queen's awesome. He's a great story. I'm a really big Patrick Queen guy and a big Patrick Queen fan, especially with how he's developed. But at this point, can you justify giving Roquan that $100 million deal and then turn around and giving Patrick Queen 80 or something like that and having $180 million to $200 million tied up in linebackers? I think not a lot of teams can justify that, especially with the Ravens spending a third-round pick on Trenton Simpson. So maybe the writing is already on the wall there, but never say never. It could happen. Other players, Geno Stone, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, Arthur Millette, Ronald Darby, Odell Beckham, Kevin Zeitler. Now, Kevin Zeitler spoke on his future, said he wants to be back in Baltimore, and I think it's a great fit for both sides if that were to happen. I think Kevin Zeitler is one of these guys that is just a bring that lunch pail to work guy, still playing at such a high level. Should have been a Pro Bowler all 3 years he's been in Baltimore. Patrick Queen also spoke on his future and said that he would like to be back, but he has to do what's best for both him and his family. And on the other side, the Ravens have to do what's best for them. That's what he said. So we'll see. It definitely feels like Queen is probably on the way out, but again, anything can happen. But now the Ravens have some decisions to make in terms of how they clear up some cap room. They have a decision to make on Odell Beckham. They have to, or else that cap hit with the reworked deal skyrockets to $50 million, which, of course, they're going to make a decision on that before. But maybe you clear a guy off the books like Tyus Bowser. Seems like that's the direction the Ravens are heading in right now with him. The fact that he didn't play all season, I'm sure some people maybe even forgot he was on the roster, which is unfortunate for him. You can clear money by maybe Morgan Moses. You want to go a bit younger in that direction. Maybe you want to give the keys to Daniel Falele full time. You can cut Morgan Moses here and save some money. The conversation is always going to be there with Patrick Ricard, and on his deal, you can cut him for savings, but I think he's, again, too valuable to the Ravens offense when they run the ball, by the way, which, again, we talked about, but maybe another guy. There were a couple. I mean, Ronnie Stanley's the big one. That's what everybody's going to be asking about. You can save $9 million by cutting Ronnie Stanley right now if you're the Ravens, but there's a $17 million dead cap hit. If you keep him on the roster and cut him next year, you save, I believe, $20 million, and there's only a $9 million cap hit, $6 million. I can't remember the exact dead cap hit, but I think realistically, the Ravens will probably keep Ronnie for one more season and then move on. I know there are conversations about Marlon. I don't think Marlon's going anywhere. Marlon, he'll probably be here for at least 2 more years. And I know there's a lot of controversy with Marlon right now, but I still think he's a good player. And I don't think it'd be smart for them to move on from him. But at this point, Baltimore has to look themselves in the mirror because where are the needs? Offensive line is definitely a need. I think John Simpson does not start for the Ravens next year. I think they definitely try, whether it's Andrew Voorhees, who they drafted in the 7th round after, again, he was a 3rd, 4th round player, but tore his ACL at the combine. I think he's a candidate to start there. Stanley, maybe they keep him, maybe they don't. Morgan Moses, maybe they keep him, maybe they don't. But I think you do have to invest in a 1st-round tackle, if not this year, next. I mean, next 100%, because at that point you don't have either tackle. Morgan Moses is gone. I mean, that his 3-year contract is up after next year. So if you keep him, this is the last year of his deal. And Stanley, I do not expect back after next season. So I think that you have to consider drafting a tackle. Corner is another one, right? Depending on what happens to Brandon Stevens and Marlon potentially. My agenda will always be Jair Alexander. It has been. If you're an everydayer, you know I've been preaching Jair Alexander for years on Locked On Ravens. But realistically, do the Ravens make that move, or do they invest in a 1st-round corner where they have had success doing that over their franchise history? Maybe a wide receiver. Zay is really the only sure thing on that offense right now, where obviously Rashad Bateman, who did get open for the majority of the season, Lamar just really couldn't find. There was no connection between Lamar and Rashad this year for the most part. Do you decline or accept that 5th-year option? That's another thing to discuss. That's going to be the conversation to do with Odafe Owe. I think if I'm the Ravens, I accept both just to have it. Because with Patrick Queen, if you accept that 5th-year option, if you're the Ravens, you're sitting pretty for next season, having him coming back. And I think that was only $11 million they declined, if I'm not mistaken. So it really would have helped out if they would have Queen on that 5th-year option right now. So I think you accept Rashad, you accept Odafe Owe, and just see how it pans out and, figure it out from there. Even though I think they're definitely going to accept Odafe's, but for Rashad Bateman, it's a little bit more of a question. So they're going to have some decisions to make on big free agents this offseason. This team is not going to be the same next year. They're going to lose guys. Guys are going to sign bigger contracts. They're going to draft guys. They're going to sign their own guys from outside the organization. Eric DeCosta has his work cut out for him, but my confidence in him is as high as ever, considering what he did. Really one miss from Eric DeCosta this offseason, or this past offseason, which was Rock Ya-Sin. Some housekeeping notes to round out the show here for the Ravens first, then for Locked On Ravens. Ravens are losing Joe Ortiz reportedly. He's going to go to the Los Angeles Chargers with Jim Harbaugh, which we will talk about more tomorrow on Locked On Ravens. Hint, hint. Be sure to stay tuned for that exciting episode coming up. We also have news that Mike McDonald interviewed with the Commanders yesterday, and Anthony Weaver, I think, same thing. And then Mike McDonald's going to Seattle to interview, or at least I don't know if he's going to Seattle, but there's going to be an in-person interview with him, John Schneider, who's the Seahawks general manager and Seahawks brass. It's going to be Tuesday morning, so today. And we'll see what ends up happening if Mike McDonald ends up leaving. And I think it's a definite possibility he does, which is really unfortunate for the Ravens. And at that point, I think you go in house with the defensive coordinator situation, but we'll see what happens with that. For Locked On Ravens, we have a really exciting episode coming up tomorrow. Hopefully everything goes right. I have a guest right now that I'm really excited about. Hopefully everything works out with that. I'm assuming it will. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Again, 5 days a week on Locked On Ravens. News, analysis, updates on this team. Still 5 days a week in the offseason. We're not slowing down just because it's the offseason. Been doing this since 2019. And every single weekday, literally, I have had a show come out. This is episode 1172 of Locked On Ravens consecutively, plus the bonus episodes and other bonus content we do. So if you want daily, consistent Ravens coverage, be sure to subscribe. Video form, audio form. Same show, both audio and video. So if you want to maybe listen one day, watch the next day, you can definitely do that. Again, that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.